I still remember the sound of the envelope tearing, a soft, careful rip that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Inside that thin white paper was my father's handwriting. Faded but familiar. It had been nearly a year since we lost him, and somehow seeing his words again brought a lump to my throat. But that letter didn't just hold his memory. It held my inheritance, the small fortune he had left me to build a safer, freer life. And as I stood there, staring at the empty account balance on my phone weeks later, I realized something unthinkable. My husband Thomas had taken it. Every cent, and worse. He hadn't spent it on us. He gave it to her. His ex-wife. Before all of that, my days were quiet, simple, ordinary in a way that felt comforting. Mornings smelled of coffee and buttered toast. Our kitchen windows faced east, and every sunrise painted our walls a shade of pale gold that made even the worn-out tiles look beautiful. Thomas and I had been married for 5 years. We met at a charity event my father had sponsored. He was charming, thoughtful, the kind of man who made everyone feel seen. My father liked him right away, said, "That man's got an honest face." Funny how time has a way of proving even the best men wrong. I worked as a nurse at the local clinic. Long shifts, steady income, nothing glamorous. Thomas ran a small construction company he'd inherited from his father. Business was up and down, but we managed. We had a rhythm. I'd come home late, he'd have dinner waiting. He'd talk about projects, I'd talk about patience. There were nights we laughed until midnight, lying on the couch, wine glasses half full, the world outside quiet and still. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was ours. When my father passed away, it was sudden, a heart attack that came without warning. I was devastated. I'd always been his little girl, even in my 40s. He was the kind of man who fixed everything. Broken fences, broken hearts, even broken promises. So when I learned that he'd left me something, not just memories, but a financial cushion, a piece of his hard-earned legacy, it felt like a final act of love. He'd told me, years ago, "Whatever happens, I want you to stand on your own feet." That inheritance was supposed to help me do just that. Thomas was supportive at first. He held me through sleepless nights, attended the funeral, even helped with the estate paperwork. When the check finally cleared, I remember his voice, calm, measured, but eager. "So what do you want to do with it, honey?" I told him I wanted to renovate the house, maybe fix the kitchen, finally start the small bakery I'd always dreamed of. He smiled, said, "That's perfect, baby. You deserve that." And I believed him. But then, little by little, things began to shift. The first red flag was the bank statements. I didn't usually check them. Thomas handled most of the finances. He said it made sense since his business had so many moving parts. But one afternoon, I logged in just to see $20,000 transferred out. No note, no mention. When I asked, he didn't even blink. "It's a short-term business loan," he said. "One of my clients needed materials up front. I'll pay it back next month." Something about his tone made me uneasy. The way his eyes darted to the side, his fingers drumming on the table. But I didn't push. He'd always been responsible with money before. A month passed. Then another. The money didn't come back. One evening, we had dinner with his sister, Lydia. She was chatty as always, sipping wine and telling stories about her teenage kids. Then, halfway through the meal, she mentioned something that made my stomach twist. "It's nice of you, Tom," she said casually, slicing her steak. "Not many men would help their ex like that, especially after everything she put you through." The fork slipped from my hand. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Lydia froze, glanced at Thomas. "Oh, I thought you knew." "He didn't tell you?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Lydia," he warned. She backtracked immediately. "Never mind, it's nothing. Just old stuff." But it wasn't nothing. That night after Lydia left, the silence in our home was deafening. I waited until he sat down, then asked, "What did she mean, Thomas? What did you give your ex?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It was a small favor. She's been struggling. I lent her some money, that's all. How much? He looked away. Thomas, I said again, my throat tightening. How much? When he finally met my eyes, there was guilt there, deep and heavy, about 30,000. The number hit me like cold water. From my inheritance? I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded once, barely. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, the man I'd trusted, the man who'd stood beside me at my father's funeral. He tried to justify it. Said his ex-wife was in trouble, medical bills, single mother, no one to help her. He said he'd planned to pay it back before I even noticed. But I noticed. And something inside me broke. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at the shadows moving across our bedroom walls. I wanted to hate her, this ex-wife I barely knew. But the truth was, my anger wasn't for her. It was for him. He'd taken something sacred, not just money, but trust. My father's last gift to me. And he'd given it away without so much as asking. By morning, I made myself a promise. I would find out exactly where that money went, and if I learned he'd lied about that too. Then I'd make sure he never forgot what it cost me. The day the letter arrived, I didn't think much of it. A brown envelope with my name neatly typed in black ink. No return address. No logo, just plain. I was washing dishes when David walked in holding it. "Looks official," he said, tossing it lightly on the counter. The corners of his mouth curved in that half smile he used when he wanted to look casual. But I caught the flicker of tension in his jaw. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to. I dried my hands, picked it up, and slid it open with the edge of a butter knife. Inside was a single page, from my father's lawyer. My father, gone barely 6 months. His handwriting still marked the spines of his old books in our study. His favorite pipe still sat in a little ceramic bowl by the window, untouched. I hadn't been able to move it. I read the letter once. Then twice. My inheritance, a sum my father had left specifically for me, had been transferred, finalized. The lawyer was simply confirming receipt of funds by the designated account. Only, I hadn't received a thing. I frowned and looked up. "David, did you know anything about this?" He blinked slow. "About what?" "The inheritance. Dad's lawyer says it's been transferred." But I stopped. The words felt heavy in my mouth. "It wasn't transferred to me." His hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. "Maybe there's a mistake," he said too quickly. "You know how paperwork can be." But I knew that tone. The soft, careful one he used when he was hiding something. Like when he forgot an anniversary or overcharged the credit card. Only this time, his voice carried a different kind of weight. I stared at him for a moment, trying to read his face. His eyes stayed on the mug. He took a sip that lasted far too long. That was the first clue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling fan slicing slow circles in the dark. My mind kept circling back to that letter. To my father's voice, gravelly and warm, telling me before he passed, "I want you to have something that's yours, truly yours." He had meant it. He always kept his word, so where had it gone? The next morning, I called the law firm. The assistant on the phone was polite, almost mechanical. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett, the funds were released 2 weeks ago, to the account listed in your authorization form." "What form?" I asked. There was a pause. "Paper shuffling. It was signed electronically, ma'am." "By your husband, Mr. David Bennett." The sound that left my mouth wasn't a gasp, not really. More like a small, sharp silence. "Can you please repeat that?" I said, steadying my voice. "Yes," the assistant continued, oblivious to the tremor in my tone. "Authorization for transfer was signed by your husband on your behalf. He provided the account details." "Whose account?" "One moment." More shuffling. "A Ms. Valerie King." The name hit me like cold air against wet skin. Valerie. His ex-wife. I hung up before the woman could finish. For a full minute, I just stood there. The room seemed smaller, tighter. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall felt too loud. David had been married to Valerie before me. It ended years ago, supposedly amicably. She'd moved away. He rarely mentioned her, except sometimes when the subject of forgiveness came up. She wasn't a bad person, he used to say. Just not right for me. And I believed him. That afternoon, I waited for him to come home. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just sat at the dining table with the letter in front of me and a quiet storm gathering behind my ribs. He walked in around 6, loosened his tie, kissed my forehead like nothing had changed. "How was your day?" he asked. I slid the letter toward him. "Want to tell me about Valerie King?" He froze. Then, slowly, his eyes moved down to the paper. I watched the color drain from his face, not all at once, but in waves, like someone pulling back a curtain on guilt. "Where did you—" he started, but stopped. I folded my hands, steady. "You signed my inheritance over to your ex-wife." He opened his mouth, closed it, then ran a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think," he said. "Then what is it?" He paced once across the floor. The boards creaked beneath his shoes. "She's been struggling, all right. She called me months ago, said she was sick, couldn't pay her rent, needed help. I didn't mean to use your inheritance, I cut him off." "You just gave her my father's money?" "It was supposed to be temporary," he said, voice cracking. "I was going to pay it back before you even noticed." I stared at him, disbelief curling into something sharper. "So you forged my signature?" He looked away. That silence, that single damning silence had told me everything. The room felt suddenly unfamiliar. The framed photos on the wall, the curtains I'd chosen, even the scent of his cologne lingering near me. It all seemed borrowed. A home built on trust that wasn't real. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. Too calm. "You didn't just betray me, David. You betrayed my father's memory." He flinched, like the words cut deeper than he expected. But I didn't stop there. "Do you even understand what that money meant?" It wasn't about the amount. It was his last promise to me. "And you gave it to her." He sat down heavily, rubbing his face. "I made a mistake." "No," I said quietly. "You made a choice." Outside, rain began tapping against the window, a slow, steady rhythm that filled the silence between us. That night, he slept in the guest room. I didn't tell him to. He just knew. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling once more, I realized the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that love, the kind I thought was unshakable, could crumble in the quietest ways. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, the house felt like a stranger's home. The air was still, thick with unspoken words. David had left early, the indentation of his pillow still cold when I woke. On the kitchen counter, there was a note. "We'll talk tonight. Please don't do anything rash. D." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Rash. That's what he called it when I had every right to fall apart. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, and not because I brewed it wrong. It was the kind of bitterness that sits at the back of your throat. Quiet, stubborn, impossible to swallow. I kept replaying his words from the night before. She was struggling. How easily he said it, as if her struggle mattered more than my trust. By noon, I called the lawyer again. I needed the truth, not David's version of it. The woman who answered this time spoke gently, almost pitying. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett," she said. Mr. Bennett requested the funds be wired directly to Ms. King's account. There was a signed authorization, electronic, yes, and a notarized copy of your signature. We verified it. I felt my chest tighten. "You verified a forgery," I whispered. "Ma'am, if there's been fraud, we recommend you speak to law enforcement. But please understand, we acted in good faith." Fraud. The word hung in the air like a curse. I ended the call and sat for a long time, staring out the window. The rain had stopped, but everything looked gray, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. That evening, David came home. He walked in quietly, carrying his guilt like a shadow. "I talked to Valerie," he said before I could speak. "Of course you did," I replied, folding my arms. "She said she'll send it back." "All of it," I laughed, an empty, humorless sound. Just like that? She'll return my inheritance because you asked nicely? He frowned. I'm trying, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far. You keep saying that, I said softly, as if intention erases betrayal. He sank into a chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. She was desperate, Mia. You don't understand. I thought if I helped her, it would... Close a chapter. End things properly. End things properly? My voice trembled, but I held my ground. You're married to me, David. That chapter should have ended years ago. He didn't answer. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I stood up, turned toward the door. I'm going to my sister's for a few days. He rose suddenly. Please don't what? I snapped. Don't need space to breathe? Don't think about how you forged my name and gave my father's gift to another woman. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. His hand dropped. The look in his eyes was pure regret. But regret doesn't rebuild trust. I left with one suitcase and the envelope from the lawyer. My sister, Lila, lived 30 minutes away in a cozy townhouse filled with plants and too many candles. She opened the door before I even knocked twice. One look at my face and her smile vanished. What happened? She asked. I didn't answer right away. The words came slowly, one at a time. David, my inheritance, Valerie. Her eyes widened. You're kidding. I wish I was. We sat in her kitchen that night, tea growing cold between us, as I told her everything. When I finished, she leaned back, shaking her head. I never liked that man, she muttered. Lila. I'm serious, Mia. He always had this polished guilt thing, like he was rehearsing his kindness. I sighed. I thought he was steady, safe. That's the thing about steady, she said quietly. Sometimes it hides rot underneath. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself. I went for walks, helped her water the plants, even baked a pie we never ate. But inside I was unraveling, every night. I checked my email, hoping for an update. Nothing, until the 4th day. A message popped up from a name I hadn't seen in years. Valerie King. My heart pounded as I opened it. Mia, I know what you've been told. It isn't the whole story. I didn't steal from you. I just accepted what David offered. If you want to talk, I'll explain everything. I read it 3 times, unsure whether to be furious or curious. Lila looked over my shoulder. You're not seriously going to meet her, are you? I need to know, I said. From her own mouth. Or she'll twist it, Lila warned. Maybe, but I can't move on without understanding why. The next afternoon, I met Valerie at a quiet cafe near the harbor. She looked different from what I remembered. Thinner, tired, her hair streaked with silver. Her smile was cautious, not cruel. I didn't want to hurt you, she began. I didn't reply. I let her speak. He said the money was part of a business deal. That you both agreed to help me invest. I thought it was his decision, not yours. My stomach turned. He told you that? She nodded. I didn't question it. I thought maybe he was just trying to make things right after how we ended. I stared at her. And when you found out it was my inheritance? Her eyes glistened. By then it was gone. The bills, the treatments, everything. I didn't mean to take what wasn't mine. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She reached for her cup, hands trembling. He said he'd tell you. That you'd understand. Understand. The word burned in my chest. I stood up slowly. You know what's worse than losing money, Valerie? Losing the person you trusted most, twice over. Her lips parted, but I walked away before she could answer. Outside, the wind off the harbor stung my face, cold and sharp. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about who David really was, and who I had been pretending he still could be. That night, I sat by the window in my sister's guest room, watching the rain return. My phone buzzed, a message from David. I heard you met Valerie. I can explain. I turned the screen face down and whispered to the dark, You already did. The next few weeks unfolded like a storm that refused to pass. I thought that by confronting Eric and his ex, I had already faced the worst of it. But the truth has a way of echoing, bouncing from one wall to another until everyone hears it. It started small. A whisper at the church bake sale. Then a text from my cousin, asking if it was true that Eric had given away my daddy's money. Within days, it wasn't just whispers. It was a full-blown story, reshaped, retold, and twisted until even I could hardly recognize it. Some said I'd lost everything because I was careless. Others said Eric had been tricked by his ex. The worst rumor claimed I'd let him do it out of love. I didn't defend myself. I was too tired, too hollow to keep explaining. But then one morning, my mother-in-law showed up at my door. She was a quiet woman, stern, dignified, with the kind of presence that could fill a room even when she said nothing. She sat at my kitchen table, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on me. "I heard what he did," she said softly, "and I'm ashamed." Those words broke me more than any rumor could. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You know, when a man forgets who taught him about loyalty, it's the women who carry the shame. But don't you carry his. Not anymore." Her support gave me the courage to do something I hadn't yet done. Speak publicly, in my own voice. That Sunday, I went to church. I hadn't been in weeks. People looked at me as I walked down the aisle, curious, pitying, judgmental. I didn't care. After service, during the fellowship hour, I stood up and asked if I could say a few words. "I know y'all have heard stories," I began, my voice steady but my heart pounding, "about my marriage, my inheritance, and what was taken from me. I won't tell you which version is true because you already know. What I will tell you is this. Sometimes love blinds you so much, you forget your own worth. And by the time you see it, the damage is done." The room went silent. Even the children stopped moving. But I'm not standing here to ask for pity. I'm standing here to remind every woman, every person, that silence protects the wrong people. If someone wrongs you, speak. If they take from you, fight. And when it's over, forgive yourself first. When I finished, the pastor nodded at me, a quiet blessing. Then people started coming forward. Some hugged me. Some whispered their own confessions, stories of money stolen, trust betrayed, forgiveness never found. It was like peeling back a curtain. We were all hurting, just in different ways. A week later, something unexpected happened. Eric's ex-wife, Dana, came by the house again. She didn't knock this time, just stood on the porch clutching an envelope. "I returned the money," she said simply. "Every dollar. I didn't know it was your inheritance." I swear I didn't. I didn't reach for the envelope. I just looked at her. "Why now?" She exhaled. "Because Eric's falling apart. He thought he could fix things, but he's losing everything. His job, his friends, his reputation. It's all slipping away. And honestly, I don't want his guilt on my hands." I nodded slowly. "You did what you thought was right. I'll handle the rest." She left the envelope on the railing and walked away. I watched her go, the late afternoon sun glinting off her hair. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just release. That night, I deposited the money into a savings account, not to replace what I'd lost, but to start something new. Something mine. Word spread that Eric had been suspended from work after an internal audit uncovered financial irregularities. I didn't celebrate. I didn't curse him either. Justice had its own quiet way of finding balance. One evening, I sat on the porch with my mother-in-law. The air smelled of rain, and the crickets sang their endless song. "He's moving out of state," she said finally. "Starting over somewhere else," I nodded. "Maybe that's for the best." She looked at me for a long time. "You're stronger than you think, you know." Most women would have folded, I smiled faintly. I did fold. I just learned how to stand back up. We sat in silence after that, watching the sky turn indigo. There was peace in the quiet, the kind of peace that doesn't erase the past, but makes it bearable. That night, I realized the story wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my voice, and the love I deserved to give only to those who earned it. Time has a strange way of softening the sharpest edges. Weeks turned into months, and the anger that once burned in my chest began to fade into something quieter. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. I'd moved into a smaller place by then. A modest 2-bedroom apartment overlooking a small park. The kind where children laughed in the distance and neighbors waved from their porches. It wasn't the home Eric and I had shared, but it felt mine. And that was enough. The first morning there, I woke up to the sound of birds and lights slipping through the curtains. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my father's old pocket watch, the one he'd left me before he passed. I used to think his inheritance was just about the money, but now I realized it was about legacy, about remembering my worth, even when someone else tried to take it from me. I started working part-time at the local library. It was quiet, peaceful, filled with stories of people who'd lost and rebuilt. Sometimes I'd see women my age sitting by the window reading in silence, and I'd wonder how many of them had loved too deeply, trusted too much, and had to learn the hard way to stand alone. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about Eric, how he'd tried to start a business that failed, how he'd been seen at a bar talking about regrets and second chances. I didn't wish him harm. I just hoped he'd find the lesson buried beneath the wreckage he'd created. One rainy evening, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in his familiar hand. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I lost everything because I forgot who I was supposed to protect. You trusted me with your heart, and with your father's legacy, and I destroyed both. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I hope one day you find peace, even if I'm not part of it. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside my father's old Bible. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. It just felt finished, like closing the last page of a long, painful chapter. Not long after, I met someone new, not in a romantic way, but in a human one. His name was Harold, an older gentleman who came to the library every Thursday. He'd lost his wife years ago and always carried a book of poetry in his coat pocket. One day, he noticed me shelving books and said, "You look like someone who's seen both the storm and the rainbow." I laughed softly. "Something like that." He smiled. "Then you know life never ends in the storm, does it?" That small moment reminded me how far I'd come. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was grateful, even for the pain, because it had carved space for peace to enter. I started volunteering at a local women's center soon after. Many of the women there had stories like mine, stories of trust broken, promises betrayed, and identities lost in someone else's shadow. I listened, I shared, and slowly I began to see my story not as a tragedy, but as testimony. One afternoon, a young woman came to me, tears in her eyes. "He took everything from me," she said. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I reached across the table, took her hand, and said softly, "Then you start by remembering who you were before he touched your life. That woman is still in there, waiting for you to come back to her." Her tears turned into a fragile smile. And in her eyes, I saw a reflection of who I used to be. Months later, I went to visit my father's grave. The sun was low, the sky a tender gold. I laid a single white rose on the grass and whispered, "Daddy, I finally understand what you wanted for me." Not comfort, not money, but courage. As the wind moved gently through the trees, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you've finally made peace with both the past and yourself. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale after that, but it became mine, and that was worth everything I'd lost. You know, sometimes life doesn't break us to punish us. It breaks us to rebuild us. There are moments when the people we love the most become the reason we forget our own worth. But every heartbreak, every betrayal, it's really just life asking us, do you remember who you are without them? What she went through wasn't fair. Losing the man she trusted, the home she built, and the legacy her father left her. It could have destroyed her. But instead, it refined her. She learned that peace isn't found in getting back what was taken. It's in choosing not to carry the pain any longer. and maybe that's a lesson for all of us tonight. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it simply means freedom. So if you've ever been broken by someone you loved, I want you to remember this. Your story isn't over just because they left. It's just beginning, the moment you choose yourself again.